In 1982, DC Comics introduced one of the strangest heroes they've ever published. A character who looked like he had stepped straight out of a Saturday morning cartoon, but somehow ended up becoming an official part of DC continuity. A flying, superpowered rabbit named Captain Carrot. At first glance, Captain Carrot feels like a joke. Kind of character that might show up in a parody comic, or a one-off gag issue before quietly disappearing. But the truth is a little more interesting than that, because Captain Carrot didn't just appear once and vanish. He actually starred in his own series, led an entire superhero team, and eventually became a part of DC's official multiverse. And somehow, decades later, he's still there. To understand how a superhero rabbit ended up sharing a multiverse with Batman and Superman, you have to go back to the early 1980s, when DC Comics was experimenting with some very unusual ideas. Captain Carrot was created by writer Roy Thomas and artist Scott Shaw. By that point, Roy Thomas had already built a strong reputation in the industry, having worked extensively at Marvel, before eventually moving over to DC. Scott Shaw, meanwhile, was known for his animation-inspired style and his love of cartoon storytelling. Together, the two creators set out to do something that felt both nostalgic and a little bit experimental. Back in the early days of comics, funny animal characters were everywhere. Publishers produced entire lines of comics starring cartoon animals, many of them heavily inspired by animation. By the 1980s, though, that style of comic had largely disappeared. Superheroes had become more serious, and the industry had shifted towards a different tone. Roy Thomas and Scott Shaw wanted to bring some of that cartoon energy back. But instead of doing a simple gag comic, they decided to build a full superhero universe populated entirely by animal characters. The result was a team called Captain Carrot and his amazing zoo crew. The characters first appeared in a preview inside the new Teen Titans number 16 before launching their own ongoing series later that year. The comic leaned heavily into humor and parody, but it also had the structure of a traditional superhero book, complete with team dynamics, villains, and ongoing storylines. At the center of that world was a rabbit named Rodney. Rodney Rabbit lived in a parallel universe known as Earth C-. In this reality, animals had evolved into intelligent, human-like beings who built their own civilization. They had cities, governments, media, and of course, their own superheroes. Rodney himself started out as a fairly ordinary rabbit living in that world. But like many comic book heroes, his life changed thanks to a strange accident involving cosmic radiation. Rodney discovered a patch of carrots that had been altered by radiation from a passing meteor. When he ate one of those so-called cosmic carrots, he suddenly gained a collection of incredible abilities. He could fly, he possessed immense strength and durability, his senses became far more powerful than those of a normal rabbit. In other words, Rodney Rabbit had essentially become the Superman of his universe. With these new abilities, Rodney adopted the heroic identity of Captain Carrot, and began protecting his world from various threats. But like most superheroes, he didn't work alone. Captain Carrot eventually helped form a team known as the Amazing Zoo Crew. The team included a number of characters who combined superhero archetypes with cartoon-style humor. There was Pig Iron, a massively strong boar who served as the team's powerhouse. There was Rubber Duck, a hero whose body could stretch and bend like rubber. Another member was Fastback, a turtle who somehow became the fastest hero on the team. Then there was Yankee Poodle, a patriotic hero who leaned heavily into American imagery and symbolism. And finally, there was Alley Cat Abra, a magician cat whose mystical abilities added another layer to the team's adventures. Together, these characters formed one of the most unusual superhero teams DC had ever published. But the funny thing is, Captain Carrot and the Zoo Crew weren't actually the first funny animal superheroes in the comic industry. Long before Captain Carrot appeared, comics were filled with characters that combined cartoon animals with superhero storytelling. For example, characters like Super Mouse and Hoppy the Marvel Bunny had already proven that readers were perfectly willing to accept animal heroes saving the day. In many ways, Captain Carrot was less of a brand new idea and more of a revival of a style of comic that had slowly faded away. Roy Thomas and Scott Shaw took that older concept and updated it for the superhero world of the 1980s. The result was a comic that blended superhero storytelling with cartoon-style humor and an almost constant stream of puns. Despite the comedic tone, the series still told full superhero stories. The Zoo Crew fought villains, dealt with bizarre threats, and occasionally found them in stories that became surprisingly ambitious. One of the strangest storylines connected to the characters was a crossover called The Oz Wonderland War. This story combined elements from the world of the Zoo Crew with characters inspired by classic fantasy literature like The Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland. The result was exactly as strange as it sounds. Unfortunately, despite this creativity, the original Captain Carrot series didn't last very long. Like many experimental comics of the era, it struggled to find a wide audience and eventually ended after a relatively short run. For many characters, that would have been the end of the story, but Captain Carrot turned out to be surprisingly durable. Over the years, DC occasionally revisited the character when exploring the stranger corners of its multiverse. When DC officially reintroduced the structured multiverse in the Series 52, the Zoo Crew's home world was given a new designation, Earth 26. This meant that Captain Carrot's universe wasn't just a forgotten parody anymore, it was now an official part of DC's cosmic map. Later, writer Grant Morrison brought the characters back again during the Multiversity, a project that explored different realities across DC's multiverse. For Morrison, a writer known for embracing the weirdest parts of comic book history, Captain Carrot fit perfectly into this story. And that might be the most interesting thing about Captain Carrot. He started as a parody, a funny idea about a rabbit who gained superpowers from radioactive vegetables. But over time, that idea became something much bigger, because the DC universe has always been more than just a single world. It's a multiverse filled with alternate realities, strange concepts, and characters that range from deadly serious to completely ridiculous. In one universe, Batman is fighting crime in Gotham City, and in another, a rabbit in a red cape is flying through the sky after eating a cosmic carrot. It's ridiculous, but it's also a perfect reminder of something comics used to do incredibly well. They left room for strange ideas, and sometimes those strange ideas stick around a lot longer than anyone expects, even if they start with a superhero rabbit. So, what do you think? Is Captain Carrot one of the strangest DC heroes ever created, or just proof that comics are at their best when they're willing to get a little bit weird? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this look at one of DC's more unusual corners of the multiverse, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives in comic book history. And if you want to go one step further, you can always become a channel member. The link is in my description. Your support helps me keep making content like this, and members even get their name featured in future videos. Before you go, I'd like to hear from you. What's the weirdest superhero concept you've ever seen in a comic? And more importantly, who should we cover next? Whether it's another forgotten character, a bizarre comic storyline, or one of the stranger teams publishers have come up with over the years, let me know what you'd like to see covered. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I always enjoy seeing what characters people remember from the deep cuts of comic history. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.